Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's daily devotional. So, the daily devotional today is going to be about a place in the Old Testament. It still exists today. It's called Megiddo or Megiddo. As you can see on this map that we have up here, you have Kadesh and Hazor up here. You'll remember, for those of you who were in our study regarding Deborah and Barak, in Judges chapter 4 and 5, Kadesh and Hazor feature very prominently, as well as Mount Tabor, where the battle against Sisera took place in and around Mount Tabor. Megiddo is actually here, as we see this on this map. In fact, there is a river. We see the name here, River Kishon, that flows right past Megiddo. In fact, there we are. You can see Megiddo here on this map. It's a little bit zoned in here. This is the River Kishon as it goes down here. Here's Jezreel. Here's Tanakh. This is Megiddo. In fact, if you want to, you can see the mound where Megiddo still exists. There's plenty of pictures online that you can look up. So why do we want to talk about Megiddo tonight? Well, Megiddo is it's an interesting history, interesting series of times in the Old Testament where Megiddo is mentioned. It's mentioned a total of 12 times. And there are several occasions where Megiddo is mentioned in context of battles that are taking place. But we find here in Joshua chapter 17, regarding the land that was taken by the tribes of Israel, we see how that Manasseh ended up taking Beth Shean and its towns, Ibleam and its towns, and the inhabitants of Dor and its towns, the inhabitants of Endor and its towns, the inhabitants of Tanakh and its towns, and the inhabitants of Megiddo and its towns, 3 hilly regions. But the children of Manasseh could not drive out the inhabitants of those cities, but the Canaanites were determined to dwell in that land. And so eventually we see how Israel, they put the Canaanites into forced labor. They didn't utterly drive them out, even though that was the commandment of God. And that ends up being a major point going forward for Israel, the fact that they were not driven, the Canaanites weren't fully driven out of these places. But Manasseh is given, Megiddo is a part of the land that Manasseh is given. Now, that being the case, Megiddo actually is mentioned in Judges chapter 5. This is in this prayer, this song of praise to God being sung by Deborah and Barak. And it kind of goes through the different ways in which God is being praised and how God has dealt well with Israel and taken care of them. And at this point in verse 19, the kings came and fought, and the kings of Canaan fought in Tanakh by the waters of Megiddo. They took no spoils of silver. They fought from the heavens. The stars from their courses fought against Sisera, and the torrent of Kishon swept them away. That ancient torrent, the torrent of Kishon, O my soul, march on in strength. And so it kind of gives us a little bit more context to this great battle from Mount Tabor. Apparently it took place in and around the Kishon River, as we looked at that on the map, and kind of in the general vicinity of Megiddo. In addition to this reference here in Judges, Megiddo also comes up in 2 Kings chapter 9 and in verse 27, where we find King Ahaziah being killed by Jehu. It says, when Ahaziah, king of Judah, saw this, he fled by the road to Beth-Hagen. And so Jehu pursued him and said, shoot him also in the chariot. And they shot him at the ascent of Gur, which is by Ibleam. And he fled to Megiddo and died there. And then, of course, his servants carried him in the chariot to Jerusalem and buried him in the tomb of his fathers in the city of David. But that's not the only king to meet a gruesome end in Megiddo. We see in 2 Kings chapter 23 and in verse 29, talking about Josiah. In his days, Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, went to the aid of the king of Assyria to the river Euphrates, and King Josiah went against him. And Pharaoh Necho killed him at Megiddo when he confronted him. Then his servants moved his body in a chariot from Megiddo and brought him to Jerusalem and buried him in his own tomb. And so this individual, Josiah, was also killed at Megiddo. In fact, this comes up in 2 Chronicles 35 and in verse 22 as well. Nevertheless, Josiah would not turn his face from him, but disguised himself that he might fight with him. He did not heed the words of Necho from the mouth of God, so he came to fight in the valley of Megiddo. And an archer shot King Josiah and said, "Take me away, I'm severely wounded," but he died. Okay, so Megiddo features very prominently in terms of battles being fought. And like I said, there are a total of 12 references. Some of them are just kind of in passing. Some of them are in reference to the land that was to be the inheritance for Manasseh. And it's even mentioned in a prophecy in Zechariah about mourning, great mourning in Jerusalem, great sadness, great pain, and so forth. But Megiddo has an interesting backstory. Why are we talking about Megiddo? Well, Megiddo actually has another claim to fame, if you will. There's one more reference in the Bible to Megiddo. And this brings us to a bulletin, or not a bulletin, an article that I want to focus on for the rest of our time tonight. So the title of it is "Welcome to Armageddon, Meet the City Behind the Biblical Story." And so I'm not going to read this whole article, but there are some parts I want to focus on. Megiddo is an archaeological site that was inhabited between roughly 7000 BC and 300 BC. Numerous battles were fought near Megiddo during that time, and the book of Revelation, which refers to the site as Armageddon, prophesied that a final battle at the end of time would take place there. Now, the particular verse that's being referenced is in Revelation chapter 16. In this particular passage, Revelation chapter 16, I'll go ahead and read this before we keep going here. In verse, starting, it's just verse 16. It says, "They gathered them together to the place called in Hebrew Armageddon." Now, it's interesting because the term Armageddon isn't just Megiddo. It's actually a combination of two terms in the Hebrew. One means hill, the other is Megiddo, as it is referenced in the Old Testament. So, literally, it's the hill of Megiddo what's being described. It has been kind of, over time, has turned into Armageddon, all one word. But literally, it means the hill of Megiddo. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind as we read through this article. So the article goes on to say that Megiddo is mentioned a dozen times in the Hebrew Bible, just like I said, and in a multitude of other ancient texts, but it is especially well known as the setting in the New Testament for the penultimate battle between the forces of good and the forces of evil. And this is a professor. He talks about Armageddon and archaeology and so forth. The name Armageddon comes from the Hebrew word Har Megiddo, and that's actually the Hebrew terms there, Har Megiddo, which means the mountain of Megiddo. By the Middle Ages, multiple nationalities, languages, and centuries had added an N and dropped the H, transforming Har Megiddo to Harmageddon and thence to Armageddon. And you can kind of see there's actually a picture. I thought there was a picture in this article at some point somewhere, but maybe there's not. But anyway, today visitors to the site will see that much of it is a tell or a mound made from the remains that humans have left behind over thousands of years. Within the mound itself, we now know are the remains of at least 20 ancient cities built one on top of another. There have actually been numerous Armageddons at the ancient site of Megiddo already, as one civilization, group, or political entity gave way to another over the millennia, one world ending and another beginning. And it goes on to acknowledge many battles have been fought at or near Megiddo. For example, Egyptian Pharaoh Tutmos III, female Pharaoh that lady, her nephew and stepson who succeeded her and reigned between 1479 and 1425 BC, defeated a coalition of cities near Megiddo. His victory resulted in Egypt taking over a sizable portion of the eastern Mediterranean. Another important battle took place when King Josiah of Judah fought Egyptian Pharaoh Necho II near Megiddo. It resulted in the defeat of Judah and the death of King Josiah. Judah was substantially weakened and was destroyed a few decades later by Babylonian King Nebuchadnezzar II. And of course, as we already noticed, you could add to this list as well King Ahaziah, who was also killed by Jehu, who died. He died in Megiddo. Here's one of the pictures of Megiddo. This actually mentions there was actually a battle in World War I that was fought near Megiddo, and that was kind of a significant battle. It says Megiddo was a place worth fighting over because the site is located at the crossroads of the Jezreel Valley, an important strategic location that overlooked several trade routes. The valley was extremely important to the ancient world because whoever controlled Megiddo controlled the trade route between Egypt, Europe, and Mesopotamia. These preferred trade routes and the epic battles fought to secure and tax them have shaped the history of the Holy Land and are the reason that Megiddo has the reputation it does as a famous battlefield. In the book of Revelation, Megiddo was identified as the location of the end of the world because it had been the epicenter of armed conflict throughout Israel's history. And there's a whole lot more details about some of the stuff that they found there, things that they've dug up, like ivory pieces and so forth. There was a great temple that they discovered, which would have been a Gentile to an idol, a temple to an idol. And so it also talks about fortifications that they found in Megiddo, and the article continues and ends here. Archaeological work continues today and is led by archaeologists from Tel Aviv University in Israel. The site draws thousands of tourists every year, many of them attracted to the site by the prophecy of the end of times battle that is supposed to take place at the site. According to Klein, tour guides at the site often greet their guests by saying, "Welcome to Armageddon." So, I thought this was I picked up on this. This article was, when was this post? I mean, I've had this one kind of I have a list of just articles that I think would make good daily devotionals, and this was published 6 months ago. I've had it in here probably for maybe 2 or 3 months, on my list. But I thought it was really interesting, not only the history of Megiddo, but also the fact of how literally people interpret Revelation chapter 16. And I think that's perhaps one of the most telling aspects to this entire thing, is that this entire revelation, it's all one revelation, really. It's made up of different parts, but it's all one revelation. It is to John, but ultimately the message is to the churches of Asia. Though that's who is addressed at the very beginning of the book, in the churches, with the churches of Asia, the 7 churches of Asia. But you'll notice that John is witnessing all of this take place. Okay, when he comes to verse 16, he doesn't say, "And they will gather together at a place called in Hebrew Armageddon, and this is what will happen." That's not what John says. He's seeing all of this play out. Okay, people take that to mean that this is a foretelling, that that's what's going to happen literally. But keep in mind, outside of Revelation, really outside of the first 3 chapters of Revelation, Revelation 1, in which John talks a little bit about the setting and Jesus being given a vision of Jesus. Ultimately, Revelation 2 and 3 are direct, ultimately, letters from Jesus to the churches of Asia. And then starting in chapter 4, John is taken in the Spirit and he's given this glimpse of heaven. Okay, this revelation of heaven and things that were to come, that's true, but in the sense of very metaphorical, very symbolic ways in which it's described to him, and the ways in which he relays that to the Christians. And of course, ultimately, the message of the book of Revelation is to these churches of Asia, primarily as they are witnessing and are living through what is going to be the beginning of the crumbling of the Roman Empire. And as they face that, their persecution is going to get even worse. Okay, we know the type of persecution that people like Paul and Peter suffered under the hand of Nero, but even beyond Nero, and Nero was crazy. Okay, he was crazy. But even after Nero, there were even more diabolical Caesars who put to death Christians, threw Christians into the arena to fight lions. I mean, there was terrible, terrible things that happened to Christians going forward as the decay began in the Roman Empire. And I'm not just talking about moral decay. Obviously, it was always morally detrimental or deteriorated, but in terms of political decay, of kind of stability and so forth, the Roman Empire is going to continue to crumble over the next couple hundred years. Ultimately, where around in the 300s or so, the Roman Empire really starts to really lose itself. But ultimately what you have here is Jesus warning the saints that, listen, this is going to continue to take place. These terrible things are going to happen, but God is going to have the ultimate victory. Okay, God will bring judgment upon all those who trouble his people. That has always been true. Nothing escapes God's notice. And ultimately, there will be a reckoning for, a judgment day for all those, and ultimately it'll be a day of condemnation for all those who are evil, who do not do as God has commanded, who trouble his people. And so this is meant to provide comfort to these brethren as they're facing these terrible situations that they're being placed in because of their faith. And the encouragement to every single one of those 7 churches of Asia, Jesus offered different motivations. To him who overcomes, to he who overcomes, I'll give him a crown of life, or to sit on my throne. And all of these motivations for the saints to understand that no matter what it is you face, if you will be faithful, God he notices and he sees what you're going through, and he understands what you're going through. You be faithful until death. And all of Revelation ultimately is a letter acknowledging God's care for his people, and that nothing is going to escape his notice, and that ultimately his people will be vindicated. They will be justified, and the cries and the pleas of his people are heard. And it's really, when you look at it in the perspective of the context in which it is being given, it's a beautiful letter. It really is. And that's what it is. It's a letter to the 7 churches of Asia from God and Jesus through John, and where the majority of it, again, outside of those first 3 chapters, it's a vision or a revelation given to John that is meant to be symbolic and metaphorical in many ways, to represent God will always win. Okay, evil cannot defeat God, and sin will never defeat God. And as long as we're on God's side, evil and sin will never defeat us either. So I think it's interesting because, like I said, that article, it looked at Megiddo as being the literal place in which this battle will take place, when in Revelation chapter 16 and in verse 16, the hill of Megiddo is mentioned as this place of battle, not because it's going to literally take place there, but because Megiddo carries with it an understanding that this is a crucial position in Israel. In the past, it had this history as being a battlefield, a battleground, and God in Revelation chapter 16 is describing the victory over sin and the victory over the beast or Satan, and well, in many ways, the beast almost kind of carries with it this connection to Rome as well. And ultimately, even more broadly, all those who seek to bring about pain and trouble for God's people, those who serve the beast, those who trouble the saints, those who persecute and kill the saints. And so this is not a literal Armageddon in the sense that a literal battle will take place in Megiddo. It is simply referenced as to give an idea or an understanding of this is the thought process that's being carried with Megiddo, this great battlefield in which God is going to be victorious. And of course, John is seeing this play out. When he says this in the past tense, they gathered them together to the place called in Hebrew, and then in verse 7 he goes right into talking about the 7th angel and what he did. So this is all happening in real time for John as it's being shown to him. Not that this is a literal representation, it is a symbolic one. All right, everybody, that's the daily devotional for you today. Just something kind of maybe a little bit random, not quite as random if you have been looking and watching and being a part of our studies regarding Deborah and Barak. In that Megiddo has been mentioned in those texts as well, and certainly that area is certainly a part of that context. But I thought that was kind of an interesting discussion on Armageddon and Megiddo and kind of its background and why is it mentioned in Revelation 16 verse 16. All right, everybody. So that ends the daily devotional today. We will pick up with our next daily devotional on Monday, Lord willing, at 6:30. Keep in mind, tomorrow's Saturday, no daily devotional tomorrow, and Sunday I will upload the Bible class will be in Titus, ending Titus chapter 1 Sunday, as well as the sermon. I'll upload those as quick as I can Sunday afternoon. All right, everybody. Lord willing, I'll see you all Monday. Thanks.